All opinions expressed on Crosstabs are those of Brian and Reagan and do not reflect the views, thoughts, or opinions of individual legislators or the Legislative Assembly. Relax. Some things are just for fun. Guests likewise join the show to express personal views and opinions. We desperately hope they say something funny or entertaining, but thoughts shared, whether entertaining or stultifying, are those of the individual and separate from any role or a title a guest may possess. Enjoy the show. Or don't. But don't go whining about it if it's the latter.
We're clear to engage. Time on target. 5 mics. Out.
Yeah.
Been there a long time.
When did you first meet Reagan? How old was he?
Let's see. It would have been 20 years ago.
Duh, but he'd been like 7. I think
So
he's 27. No, he's 29. So he'd have been about 9, I guess.
his dad came in for the second time, but I came in for the first time back in '05, and that's when his family was around at the Capitol all the time anyway. So, yep,
So you were elected in '04
correct.
as state representative. Then you ascended to co-speaker of the House in 2010.
Yep, 11 and 12.
Or 11, I guess you guys would have been technically.
Right, 11 and 12, yeah.
Which, in the building today is considered to be, they say, the most bipartisan session ever. That's the word on the street.
Yeah, well, it kind of had to be because every one of our committees were equally staffed by Republicans and Democrats. Every committee had 2 chairs, a Democrat and a Republican. So it was kind of hard not to be bipartisan. The issue that was good about it, though, was that Speaker Hannah and I got along really well. So and our staff worked well together. So,
oh, that's awesome.
It didn't mean that when we went back to our caucuses, it always went well. But
I bet. I can't imagine caucus meetings were just insane.
They often have different ideas than we did, but it was okay.
I can imagine. Well, hey, welcome everybody to Crosstabs. Obviously, if you haven't figured out, we're speaking with former Senator Arnie Roblin. If you knew any history, you obviously knew he was Speaker of the House, and then he ascended to the Senate. We have his replacement when he retired from the Senate, Senator Dick Anderson, with us as well, and we're going to talk some Coos Bay and some fun stuff. Reagan's not here, so we get to talk about him as much as possible.
That's right.
And he might come on, but so when you left, when did you leave? Did you leave then in 12 to go run for Senate?
I did. So in 12 I ran because at that time Senator Verger retired, and so it was open. I'm a moderate Democrat, and my caucus was getting more and more what I would call progressively liberal, and I realized that it was better for me to go look at kinds of things in the Senate, which is a slightly different organization than the House, and the system, it was open for me, so I ran for that, and then served there 8 years as well.
Did you assume, like at that time, like when you said progressive liberal? I'm just curious. I love the history stuff. So, did you just assume that maybe because you guys obviously took back the House, you
Correct.
won back 4 of the 6 seats. I think you guys lost. So, or the 6 seats you won. So, did you just think that ability to become or retain speakership was not going to be there because of that?
No, I think they would have elected me Speaker, but it would not have been a comfortable place. It would have challenged what I believed was the right way to move things forward. And a person who had been really helpful for me, the second half of that term, we changed leaders in the caucus. The first part of the term, Dave Hunt was the leader. He had been the previous Speaker, and he and my Republican friends did not get along very well. And so in the middle of that whole thing, Tina Kotek took over as the leader, and that worked out really, really well for me. She was a very good caucus leader when it came to being able to speak both the language of the moderate and the progressives, and she helped me as speaker a lot to make sure that we got things done. So I appreciated that. I knew that she really did want to be speaker, and that was not necessarily my goal. And I got into it because I felt like I was one of the few people who could manage it during that weird session of a tie. So I chose to do that, and then saw the opportunity in the Senate. We had worked very closely with Peter Courtney, and I was always kind of amazed at his leadership style. He was a difficult person to have a conversation with if you had something you really wanted to talk about. He would change the subject exceptionally well. And I could never figure out how he had such loyalty of his staff, because he would yell at them. They'd go off and do different things. But he did it in a way that was loving, and most of them really cared for him. Even after they left, they would come back and work closely with him. And I thought that would be a good learning experience for me, because I've always looked at learning about leadership in its different forms. And he had been exceedingly helpful for the two of us when we were co-speakering, because he had gone through the same thing a few years before that. So the Senate had tied before. They went about doing it very differently than we did, but he understood the complexities of having that. And then the governor was helpful. We both talked about it. It was weird. We probably met with the governor almost every day, and with the Senate president, because if it got through the House, that didn't mean it was going to get through the Senate. And we wanted to have, because they did have a Democratic majority at the time. So we wanted to make sure that we were doing things that we cared about that would actually have a chance in both sections. So, yeah, and then we were working on a budget. We were about $2 billion in the hole when we came in. That was end of that big recession that had started in 2000.
Yeah.
And so we looked at our budget, and we had to cut about $2 billion. So it was there were some difficult things we had to make sure we could work on.
I think there might be a little bit of that budget cutting going on right now that they haven't had to do since then, because the budgets have been pretty friendly since that
That's true.
2013 scenario, right? So it's been in our favor. And this one is, well, it looks like it's okay from the state level, but the federal dynamics are really,
it's making us very nervous about what that means with regard to, are they going to help us with the health plan? Are they going to help all these different kinds of things that we expect money from the federal government to help us with? Will they be there?
yeah, that's crazy. Well, what do you, so your predecessor, or sorry, your person that came in after you, of course, you annihilated him in 2016 by what, 300 and some odd
300 votes. Yeah, my elections were always close. That was never something that I didn't have runaway elections. So yeah,
Neither one of us do.
Yeah, he scared you enough that you retired in 2020. So he
yeah,
could.
that was I as my staffer at the time, Rosie Shakin, used to say, "You voted for that crazy bill called Motor Voter. That destroyed us in the coast from the Democratic perspective." But yeah, it was kind of interesting.
Well, it's obviously I work for Senator Anderson now, and I worked on that 2020 campaign, and I'm glad you chose to retire, because that made the ascension a little bit easier, that's for sure. So, and how do you think he's done in your stead since you've left?
I only hear really good things, actually. He tends to be what I would call the old business Republican. That person who cared about the economy, wanted to make things work for the economy. Not quite as progressive in some ways, though. Housing, he's been pretty progressive on trying to figure out housing stuff. So I have been pleased that it hasn't gone what I would have called the more MAGA part of our deal. And I know that he has to work with both sides and his group. But when he made the decision, personally for me, when he made the decision that he got hired to do a job and he stayed and worked, I was very impressed, actually, because there's a lot of pressure put on people that the rest of the world doesn't really understand. And life can be very miserable if you're out there on your own. So I was pleased to see him do the work that he said he was signing up to do, and I have had one of my staffer, Rosie, still talks about how it's good to work with him. So I've heard positive things since I've taken over this job.
Well, look,
That doesn't mean I
well,
wouldn't want to get a Democrat in that position, but
Thank you, Senator. Those are nice words. I appreciate it. And I know you're watching. So,
yeah,
and
that's
Rosie
true.
does keep tabs on me. So,
Yes, she does.
so you know. So, thank you. Yeah.
But even before I got elected, the very first election that I had, Dick, as mayor of
Lincoln
City, was very helpful. He got me engaged in a couple of the programs that were up there. One was a senior day at at the casino where they went around from table to table, and he said, "You really should do that. That's an important way to get to know people up here." And so, in his own way, it was very helpful.
Oh, it kind of all comes full circle, right, Senator?
It does.
That's right.
I think there's a lot of similarities between the two,
Yep.
and certainly the senator was, in a tough spot in his own part of the district.
Yep.
I don't know that you ever won right in that part of the district, and I've never.
I was always hopeful to win Coos Bay, the city itself, not necessarily the county. Yes.
Yeah, and I've got a similar situation in
there.
the
Yeah.
part, so it's kind of ironic. Yeah.
Yep.
Well,
But we do have something, more things in common. That's down, Port of Coos Bay.
Port of Coos Bay.
Yeah, definitely. So now you've transitioned into obviously retirement out of this building, but like most people that leave this building, you guys just can't really retire and go play golf, or as the Senator Anderson says to me all the time, you failed at retirement. So That's why he's in the building, and you obviously failed at retirement. So you're now at the Port of Coos Bay, and you've been there for what? You obviously have all the history and knowledge, but
but relatively, it's only been a couple of years for Port of Coos Bay. I first got into the school board, so I'm still on the school board. I've been doing that for 4 years. And then I'm on a healthcare board for a federally qualified healthcare center called Waterfall Clinic. So I'm engaged in a lot of different things in the community that I really care about. The port was one of those that I really cared about. And so I got appointed by the governor, because we're that international port, our positions are appointed by the governor. So, yes.
That was 2 years ago?
Yep.
How many people are on the commission?
There are, I have to go count my people. 1, 2, 6 of them. No, 5 of us, I guess. Yep.
Wow. And the port, at least in my mind, and you probably have better at the history, and Senator Anderson can fill in as well. All I know, it really came into my purview with the LNG stuff and all the things that happened there. And of course, it's close to abandoned dunes in my world. That's and I remember when Senator Anderson and I talked about his race in 2020. I remember we were sitting at a coffee shop in Dallas, Oregon, and he was like, "Well, what do you know about the coast?" And I go, "I know there's like water there." And there's I think I went through the Coos Bay once. It was on my way to Bandon, I think. But I've learned a lot since then, and I think the port is really on the cusp of doing something incredible for that part of our state. And I think when the LNG stuff fell apart, I think that was like a big balloon got popped, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, at least in my feeling, like this thing is now emerging. And I don't know if you could just, both of you guys could maybe just give us kind of a little bit of a background of how we got here.
Yeah, if we go back for a ways, this was the port has always been a bipartisan issue. Democrats and Republicans. All of the Southern Oregon Republicans worked with the Democrats to figure out how could we make the Port of Coos Bay more viable as a port for international funding. When I first came here in 1970 to be a math teacher at Marshfield High School, 72, we had 13 or so mills on the bay. We were the largest lumber shipping port in the world. We had over 300 ships a year calling on our port. It was a major impact on Oregon's economy. And then with spotted owl, with fishing issues, all of a sudden the port got to be less and less important. We have been fortunate that we've had enough timber shipments going out of here that we continue to get dredged by the Corps of Engineers. So we are an international port. We still get that done without having to pay for it. If we had, we wouldn't have a port any longer if we hadn't had that. So keeping tonnage up is really, really important for us to keep the bay a viable alternative for different things. So then we had a steel mill was going to come in, and we had a big fight in our community about a steel mill out on the North Spit. That fell apart, and then we had this opportunity for natural gas. And I have always been a proponent of figuring out how to use this port. Oregon now to be considered part of the West Coast shipping industry. Portland likes to think of themselves as an international port, and they are. But again, they've dredged Columbia for the last time. They're not going to get big enough for these new Panamax ships. Coos Bay can fairly inexpensively in comparison to what other ports have had to pay to get dredged to deep enough to make that happen. And so if Oregon wants to continue to play a part on that shipping on the Pacific Rim, we have to figure out how to make the port a viable one. So the LNG was one of those things that would have worked, I think. A lot of people uptight about LNG. The other part that was important for me, if you understand gas in Oregon, there's a pipeline on the east side. There's a pipeline comes down the valley. The one that comes down the valley comes from British Columbia. It dead ends in Medford, Ashland area. And we have been told over many years that from time to time that maybe they would turn the spigots off for our gas, and that would take the whole west side would not have gas. So we built a Ruby pipeline that came in from the Dakotas and came in over into eastern Oregon. And it feeds California and it feeds eastern Oregon, but it doesn't make it across the mountains to feed us. And the port project that would have had LNG would have brought another pipeline over from Malin, Oregon, in eastern Oregon, and connected all of them. And now we would have had a system of gas in Oregon, which would have allowed gas to get from anywhere in the Midwest, Canada, to all these different ports, and we wouldn't have had a dead end like we do in Ashland right now. So for me, that made a lot of sense. If you understand Coos Bay, we used to have mills on the bay. They had their own power plants. They provided electricity for our hospital and emergency services. When they have gone away, we don't have that secondary resource for power. It all comes across the Coast Range, and it makes it very uptight for us. If there's a big storm, we can be without electricity for a long time. And we don't do any producing of our own. When they were talking about bringing in the natural gas, they were going to build their own power plant. We would have, again, had power on the coast itself. So for me, you have to look at the bigger picture when you're talking about each and every one of those. That was not a favorite of my party. It was one of those things that I felt really was important for Coos Bay itself. And it would have brought jobs. Then we had a drought when they left.
Was the fight with bringing in the metal, doing a bunch of metal and all that sort of stuff, steel,
Yeah.
was that fight where that was within the community, whereas the LNG, everybody was kind of on board in the community relatively, and then it was really more the external forces, or was it still?
We've always had a group of people in our community who don't want that kind of a development in the bay, because it poses a threat from their perspective to the bay itself. So there has always been local as well as statewide opposition to different kinds of things. The steel mill had some of the same. It had some local and some other opportunities. The production of steel in our country changed for a while, went back and forth. China was doing most of it, then we started bringing it back, and so the markets always make it difficult for different kinds of things to happen, and that one bit the dust because of a lot of that different stuff.
The town halls we've had in Coos Bay and North Bend are always the most colorful, that's for sure.
Always have been.
You do get every
Right. Yeah.
every issue, it seems.
Everyone.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. My first entry into government stuff was the Coos Bay North Bend Water Board. And I thought, this can't be that bad. My first meeting, they sent me to Lakeside, where they were trying to put a dam so we could have more water resources. And it was crazy. I mean, it was one of the craziest meetings I've ever been to. So it doesn't matter what we try to do. It creates opportunities for different people to have express their opinions. And I will say, Coos Bay, actually, Oregon coastal people express their opinions.
Yeah, there because you really do. You get this group of, well, you know this. You
Yeah,
guys are both retired, like or at least professionally, and then you have this job. But I mean, you get a lot of those folks that move in, and then they don't want to see anything change, right? But you got to
Yeah.
have a younger.
yeah,
You don't have younger people moving in. I mean, you see this up in Lincoln City, Florence, these towns that are literally the average age is highest in the state.
Yep.
Is probably on the coast.
But I think Arnie and I both have the advantage of one our age, though, talking to these people as well,
I
because
agree.
True.
I think at least I've been able to call them and play it right back at them. You live on a pension. You're not as reliant on the economy of Coos Bay and the workforce, and I've felt comfortable in talking with them at that level, and they agree.
Yeah.
It's a tough argument for a lot of people. They've come for the ocean, for the bay lifestyle, and hate to see it, change. But yet, knowingly, intellectually, that it needs to.
Yeah.
To
I mean,
unite the community.
when I came here, the high school had about 2,000, and North Bend was about 1,800. We're now both under 800. So, and yet the city of Coos Bay, the city of North Bend, haven't changed population much at all. So it's just gotten older. So you realize that without a thriving economy where you can hire people, it's hard to keep young families and people in our areas. And to make a vibrant community, you need all of the people, including a lot of young people.
Yeah, they got to see. Yeah, you got to have a reason for the kids to stay, right? And that's just what hasn't happened over the last 20, 30 years. Obviously,
That's
is
true.
they go away and they just don't come back. I mean, but hopefully the small town resurgence kind of helps. I think these former timber towns, as they say, I think you got a lot of things working for you, and that you didn't really have available before, i.e., the internet and a lot of work from home. Now you have a lot more opportunities, but you still need the anchor, and that's so
Right.
like fast forward, LNG kind of goes away. Right. I think
Yep.
just the political nature of it just wasn't there, but the port's always been there.
Yep.
Now, okay, so it take us back. So now where are we? When was that roughly? That was LNG was 21. Did they finally say no
I
to
think they
that?
finally said no. It was about that time. Yeah, it was right
Yeah.
around then. So this one was interesting in that one of our old students from Coos Bay, Brian Clem, had made some money doing a lot of different kinds of things.
Brian Clem,
So Brian Clem
those
decided
bald-headed guys are super
That's right.
dudes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Brian decided that he was going to invest some of his money in this company from the Midwest that wanted to build a shipping terminal here, because at the time when they first started doing this, the West Coast ports were clogged. They hadn't finished building a lot of rail out of Los Angeles area. They had Tacoma, Seattle was pretty packed up. You had ships out in the water waiting and waiting, costing lots and lots of money. And so eventually, this company came in, and they used to, I think they worked with Target and a bunch of other companies importing materials for them. So they came up with the idea, and we looked at ports before, big shipping companies coming in here and doing port stuff. But this one became really viable because of the need to have another port. And our port would be the shortest transit from the ocean into the docks of any on the West Coast. And so the idea of making this happen became evident from a group of people, and Brian invested a bunch of his money in it. And then they started having these conversations at looking at what they would have to do to the bay. How much would they have to dredge the bay? Where's the turning radius going to be to turn the ships around so they can go and dock? Does the port have enough property to really make it viable? How are we going to get car loads off of the boat and onto a rail, and then get that rail off to Chicago or other places in the east. So all of those things have been conversations. We've gone out and looked for loans and grants from the federal government. We've got a couple of them, about $54 million worth right now, waiting to do the planning for our rail and for the dredging and for the building of the site out on the North Spit. So all of those things have been coming together, and the company out of Kansas City is still interested, still wants to do it, has continued to be committed. So they signed an agreement before I got on board a number of years ago, actually, to do a joint public-private partnership. We've looked at what does it take to get the rail so you can double stack? What does it take to get the rail to have over mile-long sidelines so that you can get one train going and one train coming back at the same time? So all of that stuff, the high estimate is $1 billion for the rail and about $2 billion to build the project that would be all private money on the North Spit for the docks and all the infrastructure for putting the trains there. They believe that they can ship by having the train formed in Korea or in China, wherever they're bringing the ship from. They'll come off in the order they need to go on the rail. So there won't be a big issue of storing a whole lot of boxcars and stuff out on the North Spit. It's really have the train there, load it, and send it off. But that meant there's other things you have to look at along on the rail line. You've got to figure out when a mile-long train goes through Reedsport, it kind of cuts the city in half. How do you get over the rail or under the rail, or what are you going to do that?
Lakeside, right? Yeah, we heard that.
Lakeside, all of those places
Yeah.
have some concerns about this. So we've got the Department of Transportation has been working on a grant to look at how do we get the Reedsport things figured out, all of those different stuff. So we've been going through lots of planning. As you know, whenever you start to dredge the bay, it takes a lot of permitting and other kinds of stuff. So we've been working on all of that. What's really interesting is one of the very first bills that I signed on to with Joanne Verger was a dredging the bay bill. And we have been using that money, still are. It was $60 million that was set aside to dredge our bay. They now estimate the total cost for the bay is probably $500 million to do all the dredging that's needed and to build a new turning basin down the bay, a bay right in front of where they were going to put these ships. So,
just because I'm curious,
sure.
Walk me through, Senator, you can chime in too, dredging. Like, I mean, give me the layman's, like, is there just a bunch of dirt on the bottom and they just got to shove that stuff out to sea? Is that kind of the very simple version of what dredging is?
It is on a maintenance dredge, because all a maintenance dredge is, you've already got the bottom, the rock at the bottom or the solid bottom.
Yeah.
And so the rivers bring sediment down, it gets stuck there in the bay, it settles into the ground, and every 5 or 6 years, the Corps has to come in, bring a big scoop, and they just pick up all the dirt and all of the sand and stuff that's on the bottom of the bay, put it in barges, take it out and dump it in the ocean. So that's a regular dredging operation that happens here on a regular basis. But when you're deepening the channel so that they can actually dredge it, there are harder spots throughout the bay. There aren't a whole lot of them that are really, really hard. Most of it's sandstone, but a few of them are. If you go out to Shore Acres and look at the wake, you'll see there's a lot of basalt around here too. All sorts of volcanic actions happened over the years. And so there are spots in the bay where you're really going to have to do some hard, heavy work, maybe explosives, drilling, all those kinds of things to get it to the 47 or 50, whatever feet, however deep you want to go. And so that's the bigger dredging issue. The one that will cost the extra money is figuring out where all those places are, how wide you want to make it. So these boats are a lot bigger. So you've got to widen the area that's already the channel and make sure that if you've ever been at Charleston, you can see where the boats come in. They come straight in. They're heading right for the city. And then they have to make a sharp turn and go up the bay. You've got to make sure that area can make the turn every time. Our pilots have been training on that for the last 10 or 15 years. So they have models of all the bay and all the different kinds of stuff. And they need to know that they can make that corner and take it up the bay 100% of the time. You just don't. One mistake is not okay. So there's been training and work on that all along.
You're in the type of ships we're talking about. We're talking those massive ones that have just the huge amount of containers on top, right? The stuff
Yes, that's
you see
the ones. Yep. And they can't transport those up the Columbia any longer. They don't have enough depth at the Columbia.
and they even get underneath the I-5 bridge, I guess.
It-
The new one.
The big one at Astoria, they probably could get under, but the rest of them might be a problem. So yeah.
Ah, that's why. That's interesting. Yeah.
So that's
we
what
have what's another one of the interesting things. We have a rail bridge that is on a swing span. It was the largest swing span bridge in America for most of its history, and it was built over 100 years ago. It is, when it's open, it's the width of the smallest part of the Panama Canal. It was built so that any ship that went through the Panama Canal could come into Coos Bay.
Wow.
So lots of interesting history on the port.
What is that? Is that at least, what is it, like 200 feet then on each side of that swing span?
No, I don't think the old ships were that wide. The new ones are bigger like that. But, so I don't know how I can't remember exactly what that width is, but that's what it was designed for.
But none of the proposed ships would be going that
No,
far.
none of them go there, nor do they go under the bridge.
They go to the North Spit, right?
Yeah,
The North
they
Spit,
stopped
and then they
prior-
would.
Yeah.
The west side of the.
Yeah, they would not be able to go underneath the North Bend Bridge either.
Yeah.
And then I was with the train stuff. So the idea is they would pick up goes to Eugene, right? That's kind of where
Correct.
we go.
Yeah.
And then isn't there some tunnels and stuff too that you got to work
There
on?
are a lot of tunnels. Actually, when I first ran for this district, my son-in-law is a geomorphologist. He studies landforms, and he called me and said, "You have a distinct district. You have more lakes than any other house district in the state of Oregon." And I said, "Really?" And he said, "Yep." And they're all named. They're little lakes, but you got lots of them. And our rail goes across a lot of those lakes. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done to make it a Class A railroad, where you can get the speeds back up and they can handle the weight of these cars going over night and day or for a lot of days. So getting all of those fixed up, all of the bridges fixed up, all of the tunnels, so they can double stack. Everybody used to think that's going to be horrible how you do that, but it's really not quite as hard as you think, because you can dig the bottom out. You don't have to take the top off. So there's ways to get through the tunnels, and we've got most of them already close to where they need to be. But it is work that has to be done, and you have to shore up all that kind of stuff, and you have to make sure that you don't have a lot of water in those tunnels, because that creates problems. And we've put in a lot of new ties on that railroad. It costs us at the port a lot of money, and that was another thing that we took over, that when they were going to close that railroad down, everybody came together, Democrats, Republicans, federal, everybody, and had a big meeting in Eugene, and the transportation board allowed the Coos Bay to buy it. So the port of Coos Bay. So we own the rail line all the way to Eugene. And so all of the ties need to be concrete. They need to be changed. They can't be the wooden ties anymore if you're really going to have this kind of stuff. So that's a lot of work for 100 and some miles of rail to be all fixed up.
Is that just the weight, because of the weight?
But yeah, it's because of the weight and the overall how much it's going to be used in the future.
Yeah. Wow. That's a pretty massive undertaking.
It is a massive undertaking, and
how do you get through Reedsport and Lakeside without the citizens getting upset again with them?
and you want to make sure as you're doing that your regular train that's bringing in logs for a couple of our areas, that they can move every day. I mean, you don't, or every 2 days. You don't want to cut off the railroad entirely while you're rebuilding it. So you've got to rebuild it while you're running it. That's another part that makes it hard too.
Oh, so logs already come in on the rail now. Still.
Yeah, we have lots of logs coming in on the rail.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Did you know that?
Yeah. Oh, I see them stacked up.
Well, that's pretty awesome, and I've already noticed some. We were there. I guess last time I was there was this summer. We were doing some town halls, and we went down and had dinner with well, that guy that works for you, Matt. What's his face? I don't like to
Yep.
talk about him.
Uh,
Yep.
Matt Friesen. We went down and
Yep.
had dinner there at the port.
We
Looks like
actually saw we actually saw you there.
that's right.
yeah,
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 and but there's already been a lot of development happening and a lot of
Yes.
changes in Coos Bay, and I think it's obviously the money that Representative Clem and his group and what you guys are all trying to do, and we're starting to see housing now
Yep.
happening in
yeah.
Coos Bay, which is a huge problem as well, right? So
Yep.
I think it's on the cusp of something big, and I've always believed, especially being a guy that did economic development in Prineville, that was a former timber town, and
Yep.
I was president of our economic development group, and we took a chance, a huge chance in our community on this tiny little crappy little technology company called Facebook
Yep.
in 2009, and everybody was like, nobody knew what this company was. They didn't really know. Nobody was like internet, social media. What is this thing? And they want to build what? And they want to do. And it was really a leap of faith. And it's turned out to literally change the stripes of a former timber town, turning it into one of the fastest growing communities in the state. And
Yep.
I really see this being potentially that for Coos Bay. Well, not even potentially. This would be that for Coos Bay. This would literally change the stripes of that community for the foreseeable future.
And because it's trade industries, the average salaries are higher than the average salaries anyplace else in the state. So it would change the outlook of our whole community and the people who live here.
The services needed.
Yep. Services needed. There would be a reason to build new houses. I mean, we have a housing problem, but we don't have a whole lot of people that can afford houses if we build them. So it's how do you get which comes first, the horse or the cart, right?
Yeah,
and
yeah.
we've got you have to have something going to have other people want to invest in the community.
It's so true. And then you also need private insurers because that'll save your house.
That's right.
There you go. Yep.
All that stuff matters. And then the young people got to have a job. And I think
That's right.
that community, I mean, young people want to raise a family in a smaller town. We're seeing that.
I agree.
Look at Bend and some of these other areas where people are really flocking to.
Yep.
I just think having this, and it's also a little bit, it's like an Oregon job. Like it's probably
Yes.
there's some tech to it, but it's kind of
Yes.
blue collar, right? I mean, it's
Yep.
still a lot of that.
Yep.
It really could be the panacea that we've been looking for on the Oregon coast, and I really think there's some great opportunity.
We can actually be the other Bay Area.
Yeah.
Well, just make sure that they vote the right way. Let's not invite those Bay Area folks. Do we
Okay.
hide it from Californians? How do we hide it from Californians? But there's the one thing, I was talking to somebody about Coos Bay, and I remember they said, if you think about water on the West Coast, like it's completely sucked up with housing, right? You can't get around Seattle without finding a piece of ground,
That's true.
housing on it. But you go around Coos Bay and like that whole kind of area, there's a lot of land.
There
to
is a
build
lot of
houses,
land.
right, Senator? I mean, there's a lot
Yep.
of
No, there is a lot of land, not necessarily in the city boundaries, but we can extend those. I mean, there is a lot of property in and around the bay, which people could put housing on. And there's a couple big housing developments that are going right now. The same person that developed the bayfront is working on a big housing development as well. So, yes, I think the places to build it are available. Getting the services to them, our water board and others. I was on the water board for a long time. We built a dam. We have much more water now than we used to. Everybody always thinks that we're on the coast. We have lots of water. Well, that's not fresh water you can drink. So we had to build a dam to increase the water because we were getting to the point in the summer when it's a desert here that we were out with shovels moving the water so we could get it to our plant. I mean, it was very, very low possibility of water for some of those days when I was first on the board. So now we've got plenty of water, which is really important. And all of those things are things that we need to work on.
Doesn't rain all the time on the coast.
No, I
Not
no.
in the summer.
That's right.
In the summer, we're a desert.
Senator Anderson, talk to us about the housing. I think you've been working on that.
Yeah, actually, both Coos Bay and North Bend have different projects, in the works. And even the port's got some property they've looked at as
Yep.
well. So just a lot more excitement around that whole area because they recognize, I think, the need for housing and how, I think the senator made the point of chicken or egg.
Yeah.
But they seem to be energized enough to get ahead of the game here, and I think ready to pop. Um,
And this ultimately, at the end of the day, the Asian ships now, as I did my research, they go up to Canada for the most part. And
Canada built a new port, which Alaskans think of as their port, and about 60% of the materials that come in that port come back to the United States. So Port Rupert, which is up in northern BC, was a new one. Their dredging for their port was over $2 billion because it was mostly just basalt. So ours is much less than that one, but it's going now. They had some problems getting their rail line across the Rockies and doing the other kinds of things that they needed to do, but they do have a viable port that's up there, and much of what's coming in there is really destined for the United States, and we would rather that came directly into the United States and came out of Coos Bay.
yeah, I think so would President Trump. We
I
don't
agree.
like
I
Canadian
agree.
tariffs.
Yep.
And then also, but we would cut down that timeline, right? So basically, if you had stuff going to Chicago, they could come in through
Yes.
Coos Bay and goes into Eugene, gets on a truck, and away it goes.
Absolutely. No, it goes into Eugene and gets onto the Class 1 railroad and goes by rail all the way to
Oh,
Chicago.
really?
Yep.
Where's that rail line go from there?
It goes directly down through California and across. So
Reno, like Reno and over that way?
it's the UP. Yeah.
Okay.
Union
Oh,
Pacific.
Union Pacific. Okay. Well, now
They
that.
used to own this, right? They used to own this rail line.
Oh, really?
And then they sold it to a little company that eventually was going to go bankrupt, and we bought it from them. So, yes.
That's usually where you like to buy stuff when somebody's about ready to go
Yeah.
bankrupt.
Yep.
What do you think is like the major where we're at now? We've talked about the dredging and the train. That seems to be the two big ticket items, right? Is
Correct.
those
And
two.
building the plant itself, where all the cranes and that kind of stuff. So, yes, those are the big things.
And
But
then
from the port's perspective, because that's really the private company's business. Ours is the rail and the dredging.
okay.
Senator, are there other kind of developments in the wings to, not offset, but while the container operation is being built, that timeline and dredging. But I'm thinking the Georgia Pacific property up, more the
We
east.
own that, and we would love to use that with our rail if we could ever figure out what we want to bring in and ship out. Again, those would be smaller ships, with the
Yeah.
ones that are kind of floating up right now that come down the bay. Anything we could use to fix that property. We took that from Georgia Pacific, and I think there's been lots of discussions, but no one right now has really bought on to doing stuff. We rent out some of the buildings for different groups and organizations because they need it for certain things, but we would really like to develop that property.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that brings some nice diversity, through
Yeah.
the port area.
Well, I think when you get the jobs going and you have like this mecca, you got all the other people that come in, and then everything else feeds off of that. All the commercial stuff,
Absolutely true.
Yep.
and you just kind of
Yep.
explodes from there. I mean, North Bend still can't grow; they're landlocked. They're,
Yeah.
but they could have a nice
Yeah,
commercial
yeah, yeah.
spaces, and they could grow
Yeah.
up. So those three challenges, we got to build the system right to get the
Yeah.
stuff off the boats. You got to get the money for the rail,
Yeah.
and then we got to dredge.
Yep.
What's if literally, Donald Trump gave you $5 billion tomorrow, how soon do you think that? What's our
I think
timeline looking like?
Yeah, I think everybody's timeline is looking at 2 or 3 years out. Not that far, really. I mean,
Yeah. Wow.
they've been doing that already, but once we get the okays, the permits, the other kinds of stuff, that goes pretty quickly then.
So that deep water dredging of like blowing stuff up, that doesn't take very
Doesn't
long.
take very long. Once the permits are in and once everybody knows what they're going to do and where they're going to go about doing it, that does not take that long.
Does the Army Corps have to do the work?
No, you can hire private companies to do a bunch of it. Once it's done, then the Corps will take over the maintenance of it from then on.
Okay. Wow, I want that job.
Yeah.
Drop that dino in it. That'd be awesome. That would be kind of, we could do a crosstabs episode from the boat.
Yep.
And
But
then
there's,
the railroad is the same. That seems like that would take a while, but it sounds
what?
like you can go
The
pretty
rail?
quick on the rail.
I mean, there are companies that's what they do. So, it's pretty amazing how quickly they can get things done once they have the go ahead, all the permits are in hand and all the right of ways and everything are taken care of. Then that can go fairly quickly.
Hmm.
There are companies that know how to do that in a rapid way.
Right? That's crazy. And we're in the wrong business.
Yeah.
In this
Yeah.
political business.
It
Yeah.
takes a lot longer.
This takes
here.
money, right? At the end of the day. Well,
That's right.
this is a better bet than the CHIPS Act and some of the other things. And I think we need as a state, I don't know, I know you guys both know this, but I think for our listeners, we're an income tax state. And
Right.
if we invest our taxpayer dollars into these sort of projects that create jobs, guess what that does?
That's
Creates
right.
taxes and lots of taxes. And I think, then everybody in this building gets to spend it, right? And that's what they
Sure.
love to do. But you got to invest in jobs because if you
Well,
invest in jobs, it really the return on that investment is tenfold times 10, right? It's amazing.
it's those middle class and higher jobs that really pay the taxes too. So,
Yes.
so you need to have people who are employed who are going to pay taxes, and they anticipate that the population in the Southern Oregon region, if this goes into effect, and I've heard numbers that are crazy, but I'd say around 15,000 people would move into between Coos Bay and Eugene to fill the jobs and do all the things that have to be done with rail, with all the stuff that's going on with this. Plus, we'd have our real contingent of longshoremen back in our area.
Yeah.
Oh, that'd be interesting. Yeah,
And-
they'll
and-
be
and
union jobs, though, right?
The
They'll-
original
no
construction,
union.
the original constructions, they say is about 2,000 people working out there. So that's how you get things done quickly. Is you have a lot of people.
Yeah.
Well, and a lot of those construction guys that were the contractors, even
Right.
building the data centers in Prineville, all took jobs with the data centers. So, they always say, oh, it's
Exactly.
only temporary jobs. But a lot of those guys end up staying
Yes, they do.
because they become part of the maintenance
Right.
crew. They
Yeah,
become
that's
part
right.
of the
Like
stuff
the
because,
area.
they like the area. They like, they end up knowing the facility, all the things, right? And those
Yep.
guys end up staying there and just the amount of jobs that comes. Well, I think it's an incredible opportunity. I think that it would be huge. 15,000 people, redistricting could be a problem.
Yeah, all of a sudden. All of a
If
sudden.
you lose
Yep.
that southern area, that could be hard for your reelection there, Senator.
Yeah, and the reality is we also, all of us who live here, and I like to say this to people, we do care about the environment. That's why we live in the places we live,
Yeah.
and so we want them to do this right, and that's important to us. That's why the permitting and all that kind of stuff is important. When we built the dam for Coos Bay, where we have the water, all of a sudden we found out, well, you got to buy. You have some really nice wetlands up here. They're freshwater wetlands, but you need to replace them if you're going to put it underwater. So we had to go and buy stuff out all around the bay to then flood it, take the dikes out and other kinds of stuff, and bring it back into productive wetlands water. And we know, and we have people who show us up at every port meeting explaining to us how important the seagrass and all these other things are for our bay and for our fishermen and for the fish and all those other kinds of stuff. Part of this whole thing is to make sure that we we add value to the rest of the Bay as we go throughout doing this, and the companies end up having to pay for part of that. So, we do care about each and every one of those things. It's really important to us. We're doing a lot of studies. South Sluice Sanctuary, which I anticipate being put on because of the port in the near future, is a really gem of a special place. And if you haven't ever gone out there to canoe or do other kinds of things or just hike on the trails, you realize how unique and special it is. And we don't want to lose those things at the same time that we're doing this other stuff. So I think all of those things are really important to us.
Yeah, and you have a tribe down there as well, right?
Well, we have two tribes. Actually,
Two tribes.
as you know,
That's
the
right,
Senate
too.
district,
Sorry.
we have more. We have 4 of the 9 tribes are in your district.
That's
Yeah.
right. Yep.
And one thinks it is, so it's really 5 because Cow Creek thinks they are too. They like to be a part of everything. So
He
you look
takes
at
them all. Yeah, well,
that's right. So
I think
the reality is,
the tribes have really, I don't want to say come full circle, but I definitely see them really looking at economic development differently than they have in the past. And
I think you need to include them. They need to be a part of whatever you're doing. You have to include and talk to them. You need to respect what they care about and how we're going to go about doing it. But yes, I think they can be a partner. They can also say, "Hey, that's not what we want," and they can do other things. So you need to make sure you're open, inclusive, and talk to them all the time. They were very important for me over the years when I was in the legislature. I was on the Legislative Commission on Indian Services for most of the time I was in the legislature, and listening and hearing and recognizing what they bring to our community and they offer is really important.
I just got appointed. I'm following you, Senator. I'm on
good
now as well.
well, yeah, you just
it's
there, right? Yeah.
It's a great group of people.
Yep.
Well, I just really just have seen a marketable shift in kind of where the last 3 to 5 years, I just really see them looking at how do they start utilizing their grounds? How do they start utilizing their voice for economic development, for change, not necessarily just give us another casino, right? It's kind of like,
Right.
okay, now we need to look at how are we best serving our communities and also their surrounding communities.
Right.
So I think that's, and the
Yep.
coast is a big
you know,
piece of them.
place is singularly the most important thing for tribes. Their identity is their place. That's where they're going to be. That's where they've been for 10,000 years. That's where they want to be for the next 10,000 years. They need things for their people to do as well. Their kids are moving away too. That's not what they want. They need, for them to continue to be the viable tribes that they are, they need people to stay. And I have a number of tribal members in my family up in Washington, and that's a constant conversation: is how do we make sure that we have amazing places and work for our people and our kids, so they want to stay here, they want to be a part of our community, they want to continue the traditions that the tribes represent. So I think they've come to a conclusion that they have to figure out what economic development things they can do with their land and their other avenues that they put together to make sure that there are places for the kids as they grow up that they want to aspire to.
Yeah. So last question, and then I'll let you go. I know it's getting late, and that Senator Anderson's got to drive home, and Sue gets upset if I get him out of here too late in the day.
Yep.
What inside the Capitol, since you were here for so long?
Yep.
And you were a moderate. Dick considers himself a moderate. I think he's a conservative, but he calls himself a moderate. And then Representative Clem was always seen as a moderate.
Yep.
Do you see macroly, like with everything happening, maybe Democrats in Oregon shifting a little bit back towards the moderate side now, or do you see doubling down? I'm just kind of curious your perspective.
I think I'm, John Lively is a moderate Democrat from Eugene, which is, well, he'd say Springfield. So let's go with
Springfield.
And he had a bill on open primaries because, 47% of our population doesn't get to vote in the primaries because they're NAVs. And so his bill got a hearing in the House the other day, which was really interesting for me. I was online and gave some testimony. I think there is a movement to recognize that Oregon is not quite the bluest state in the world. It's more purple, and it has a lot of people who would rather things happen more in the middle than they do today. And I think there are political people who are starting to recognize that how do we engage those people in getting into our individual parties, or how do we engage them in the general elections? How do we make sure that they feel that they're a part of what's going on? And I think that is moderating a little bit, those different kinds of things. I've been impressed actually with our governor, who's gone to every county. She goes around and talks to people. She kind of said she was going to do that. She has had a special place in her heart for Coos Bay, and I appreciate that. So there's a lot of parts that indicate to me that maybe there is a feeling that you can't go too far. You got to figure out how do we work together to make this stuff work. And I hope that's happening on the Republican side as well. Again, I'm not in their politics and their stuff as much. We're going to have to wait and see, because half of you guys are going to be gone at the next election because they couldn't run again anyway. So it's going to be an interesting thing to see what happens and what the outlook of that will be over time. So I hope personally that more people spend some time talking to each other and seeing if they can come to a conclusion that doesn't have to put one against another, but look at all Oregonians and serving the population of our state.
I have my opinion on the Republicans. I'll let you go first, Senator.
Well, I could say it's tough being not only a minority, but a super minority.
Right.
So, life's tough. I don't think it's as conservative today as it was yesterday inside the caucus.
Okay.
But to Arnie's point, there's 4 individuals that are going to be gone in next year. Yeah.
Yep.
So, who knows how they get replaced, what that looks like. But again, I wrestle with the impact that 12 people can have.
Yep.
So my tactics clearly have been stay the course of my district, take care of policy, keep out of the politics of things, and let's get things worked. And I think it's made we've made progress.
Mm-hmm.
You've gotten really good committee assignments.
Yes, very. Yeah.
Yep.
I think the Republicans, I think both parties in Oregon, and I think I've seen some moderation happening. Some of the newer Democrats they're changing as they come in. They have a different mindset. They're not maybe coming in with wearing kind of, we like to call, the wokeness on their sleeve. They're coming in more like, let's just get things done. Yes, I'm left, but that's not what defines me.
Right.
Want to get things done. And I think I'm seeing that on the Republicans a little bit more. I think we're seeing, we've become a little bit more of a populist party. So we're, right, the blue collar workers have kind of, we've seen that on the coast, right? And the coast went from blue to red. So, and it's really just because the electorate just kind of, is that populist movement. And that populist movement tends to moderate a party. And I think that's probably good. And I'd love to see, doesn't mean that we should be different. We shouldn't be the same, because that wouldn't work either if we were all one. But I like the idea of having different voices where you can, in this building, we need to focus on what's good for Oregon.
Yep.
And sometimes that's a Democrat policy, and sometimes that's a Republican policy. And then we can leave here and put our jerseys on and go to battle, which I love to battle. That's always fun too. But and there's some excitement to that. But I think projects like this, you guys have obviously your history on the coast. And I think Representative Gomberg does a really good job of trying to play both sides of the fence as best he can, and just ultimately get things done. We need more of that, but we also need the conservative voice, and we need the liberal voice. And I think we're getting closer to that in this building versus getting further away.
Yeah,
I
would
think so.
agree. Yeah.
I hope to see more of it. So,
yeah.
Well, good. Thank you for your time. Thank you for
Thank you. Hope things go well for you as this session now kind of starts to wind down, you've got all your first session bills done, right? It's now they're out of one committee, and if they aren't out, they're not going to go anywhere, right?
Well, they're scheduled. They're
Oh,
scheduled.
that's right. They're scheduled. Okay.
President Wagner was up here earlier today, and I said, "So when are you going to put the sine die imminent? When is that
That's
coming?"
right.
I'm saying, because the faster we get out of here, the better off we all are. I think at the end of the day. Well, Senator Roblin, thank you so much for your
Thank
time.
you.
Senator
Yeah,
Anderson,
take care.
thank you, and appreciate everything.
Yep. You take care, and good to see you. And I'll try to get up to Capitol from time to time, stop by and say hi. So take care.
Please do, Senator. Good to see
Yep.
you.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.